I'm hoping to, sorry, I'm hoping to cover some beyond the basics techniques for printer management. And about me, one, I'm a bit of a fool since I signed up for this just before WWDC, since printing had been stable for years, and what could possibly change in Catalina? A little bit. As a result, where I could, I did do testing on the Catalina public beta, either in a Parallels VM or just as an alternate boot on a MacBook Pro. I'm with the University of Wisconsin River Falls. I've been working there about 16 years. I'm now the head of macOS and iOS support. While I am not the printer guy, essentially, I've been doing extensive printer work since before we had a dedicated FTE to printing. UWRF is one of the UW Wisconsin System Schools, was founded 1874, about 6,100 students, 800 staff and faculty, a single unified division of technology services. Don't call it a department, if they're particular about that for some reason. And a few printers. There are the usual workgroup, lasers, network copiers, label printers, along with large format printers, digital presses, printers for food labeling, badge printers, Micker printers for checks, and parking ticket printers not shown because people sometimes park illegally and college is expensive are obviously deep, dark secrets unique to UWRF. Last but not least, there are printers that print badge-like labels for things that will become food. And most of those have been under management at some point or another. For the more common types, we have 54 Konica Minolta network copiers, 236 LaserJet workgroup and office printers. There are almost no remaining personal desktop printers left, and the workgroup printer counts are way down from where they were. It's been a major years-long project that will be its own talk, I'm hoping, at some presentation. For print budgeting and allocation, we have PaperCut. For print servers, we have 2 Windows print servers and Active Directory. For just managing Mac and iOS devices, we're a Jamf shop. Most of you, I'm thinking, have probably encountered or tried print configuration profiles and probably run into the limitations of them, where their local queue names are more or less random, or at least beyond your control. You can add printers but not remove them. There's next to no access or settings control. And you're no doubt looking forward to these problems getting fixed in Catalina. And then your alarm clock goes off, you wake up, get to work, and remember, these problems are not remotely fixed in Catalina. In all of the testing I've done so far, all of the problems with configuration profiles are still there. They're still, in general, too clunky to use. Some exceptions are if you have a management system that is purely an MDM with absolutely no agent capable of running scripts on your behalf, or ironically in a BYOD or unmanaged device environment, offering somebody a signed configuration profile to add the printer is often easier than explaining, okay, open up settings, printers, write in this URL and queue name, etc. That leaves us with LPadmin, still the go-to utility for printer administration, adding, removing, and what have you. Changes in 10.15 are less dramatic than you might have expected. Raw is dead, but they've been warning about that for ages. If you try to use it, it merely yells at you and errors out. System 5 interfaces are dead. If you're wondering where the Unix graybeards are in the room, they're crying about now, but it is a fairly rarely used feature. In my testing, it seemed less fault tolerant. There were more errors where it was segfault crash rather than just error exit whatever. However, this may be I'm hoping this is a byproduct of it's a beta rather than a released operating system. And then there's this, which garnered everybody's attention. Catalina, in a future version of macOS, Snow Mountain High, Catalina, or whatever, PPDs, which unfortunately will be a major part of my talk and are usually a major thought paradigm, what have you, in printer management will be going away. But the good news is, for now, they're deprecated, not dead. And any existing LP admin scripts should work fine with no major modifications. Anatomy of the LP admin command, I'm hoping you are all familiar with this. If not, there are innumerable Stack Overflow posts about it, as well as some good presentations done at previous Mac admin conferences. Of note, however, when I have seen LP admin commands specified or used, it's almost always using the -P switch to specify a PPD. It's LP admin yada 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 -P path to a PPD file. There is an alternative called the model switch. It is -m. It offers the same function of selecting a PPD for the printer, but it is essentially you are telling cups to do it itself rather than you spoon-feeding it the PPD. To find out what arguments you give the M switch, there's the command Ipinfo M as line printer information system list models. The model designations are more variable than the usual PPD POSIX file paths. They may look like a POSIX file path, but notice they do not, like the second line there, the library does not, they never have a leading slash, unlike a real POSIX file path. Many look like URIs, a few look like keywords. And the preponderance of the URI ones you're noticing here are built into cups and too old to be useful. Plus, yeah, admittedly, the syntax is a little more confusing than just using P, so why would you want to use the M switch? Silly Mac admin, you think Apple's going to keep giving you a choice. Whenever the deprecation of PPDs goes away, it is highly likely the P switch in LP admin will go away. Or at least that strikes me as one of the more plausible ways that it could be implemented. M, because of looking at the internal structure of cups, strikes me as more likely to persist even after that point. Another reason, perhaps you have searched for a generic driver and found this little monstrosity of a path on the end of an LP admin command. If you're using M, that's it. That's the exact same driver. Also, on generic drivers, back to searching for the generic driver. Gee, looking over the GUI generic driver selection, can anybody see a tiny conceptual error in the concept of the generic driver on a Mac? In the GUI, you can see there are two drivers, which means in reality there are four. One of them is raw, which is dead and a horrible choice, even if you're on an OS where it's not dead, so we're not going to cover it. The other three more relevant are PostScript PCL and the AirPrint, aka IPP Everywhere, aka PDF-based driver. PostScript's a good general first choice if you know the printer supports PostScript. There are a growing number of devices that don't, simply because people don't like paying Adobe's licensing fees or the more complex drivers you often have to implement. PCL's more broadly compatible, but it's also grayscale, and when we rolled it out at the university widely, I ran into a lot of complaints about just the image quality it produces is pretty poor and noticeably inferior to all the others. PDF, aka the AirPrint driver, is a good choice for any newer printers. It produces compactor jobs, plus the driver itself is fairly small. It is probably the way to go going forward, and with the notice of deprecation on PPDs, it is about the only thing you can guarantee will be there or you can be reasonably confident will be there several years from now. Of note, it is slightly network talkier than some of the older, more traditional drivers. It makes a few more calls to the device to try and query information about it, but on command line setups, that is usually not a major issue. If you are doing GUI setups, it's going to expect to be able to communicate with the printer when you do it. And there are their paths in the M form and the uglier P form. When picking a generic driver, or when in a situation where you have to get one driver to work with many printers, unfortunately we do not have the luxury on the Windows side of there being a manufacturer's generic driver. They simply don't see fit to make them. I usually aim for the lowest of the same manufacturer and model line in a bid to get features like in the copy machines, for example, staplers and punch systems operable for end users. Okay. On to printer presets. Printer presets are just sets of printer settings. They can apply to one printer or all of them. They are stored as property list files, usually in the user level library preferences folder in a consistent but customized name per printer. Of note, where it says for printer, that actually is the file name of for printer, then the queue name is whatever the local CUPS queue name is. Internally, unremarkable P lists, but unfortunately, owing to their location, they are not amenable to configuration profile distribution. You're going to have to use a package installer or some other command line method to get them in place. Okay. Of note, or relevant, when a job is queued, the printer preset, the given set of printer presets is taken, copied to a separate file with it, and then once the job is spooled, the preset is essentially encoded into the print job, and it is turned into a PostScript or PDF file that waits in the spool until it can go through the filter for the final printer, for the final printing. The reason this is relevant, what if you pretend to print something? Note, ever lovable open in preview command. No, oh, sorry. If you are attempting to capture printer presets, behold the portable printer preset profile. Copy it out, continue printing with the job, see if the preset actually gets the settings you want. And though the temp file will be deleted, you'll still have this handy. It is the it contains some additional versus the static printer preset property list. It contains some additional information about the job and detail and details like the submitting application, but most of it is stuff that you can just copy and paste into an existing preset, save it. Running through this cycle is often a lot faster than do presets, save presets, print job, check it, go back, fix presets, save presets, job, check it, or at least it will cut a few steps off. Okay. Custom paper sizes are very similar, though you can specify a custom paper size for any printer. It will only make it available and honor it if the PPD tells it that it can print in that paper size. They're just stored in, again, user-level library preferences, Apple print custom papers. And on to driver file structure. Okay, so these are some common drivers that you get from macOS. Xerox is about 6,500 lines, HP 6,800, Epson 12,000, and we've got all day while I cover what these are actually doing, right? My proctor is shaking their head no. On to driver file structures, the pieces you might actually care about. Library, two relevant directories, library printers, and also by extension in library printers PPDs, where guess what kind of file hides, as well as etc cups. etc cups PPDs contains parsed PPD files, ones that Cups has taken from their raw form issued by the manufacturer and converted for use with an actual print queue on the computer, as well as printers.conf, which is Cups' master list of all available printers. It is a simple flat text file, mostly owing to its age, rather than a property list. Generally, you do not want to touch, edit, or look sideways at it for fear of what Cups will do. However, it is a useful reference for what a given set of printer settings are. Besides the PPD folder inside printers, you're going to typically find manufacturers folders. The manufacturer's folders contain anything the manufacturer wants, but most notably filters, PDEs, printer dialog extensions, and icons for any given printer. Okay. On those relevant files, PPDs, a PostScript printer description. It is a file that is more or less in the PostScript language, but just different enough so that Adobe would not sue Easy Software, the original makers of Cups. Of note, it is text. It is amenable to any ASCII text editor. They are usually prepared from a gzipped source in library printers PPDs. You occasionally find manufacturers who will just hand you a PPD file and say, okay, use this as our printer driver. That is more common with digital press or highly customized RIP systems for expert use where they assume you already have a lot of knowledge on how or what the printer is doing and can stick it in yourself. Most manufacturers will simply distribute an installer where the PPD is bundled with icons, their own filters, and what have you. For the time being, PPDs are not code signed, so it's more or less safe for you to edit. They are, of note, they are ASCII text, not UTF-8, not anything newer, because they date back to the early 80s with a 255-character line length limit. If you ever make modifications to a PPD and need to test it, there is cups test PPD, just a quiet bundled-in command. It will, on its own, give you a simple pass-fail for is this a valid PPD? If you want more detail, there is a switch dash capital W and then various levels of warning up to all, which will give you far more than you want to know about the PPD. Changing PPDs is not anybody's first choice, but it's often a choice. The PPD is responsible for anything like in the box up there. It can provide basic text fields, labels, combo boxes, radio buttons, and what have you to give the user more choices on what to do or how to configure the printer. Notably, it does not support wells, images, sliders, paths, tokenized text, or any of the more modern UI types. Traditionally, those were provided with a PDE, printer dialog extension, which let manufacturers of print drivers change the print dialog in arbitrary ways. Those are pretty much dead at this point. If a PDE is called by a PPD, it is just ignored. Okay. Of note, printer icons, fun little graphical things. Under Macs, they are in the icons format and called from the PPD with a keyword AP printer icon path. Usually you will find them in library printers, the manufacturer name, and then icons, but so far as I know, that is not enforced, so I've also seen them just dumped into library printers icons with no manufacturer name, etc. As for if you change AP printer icon path, you can change the printer's icon, but as for why you would want to, well, quick, which one's the black and white printer? Quick, which one's the black and white printer? These icons are what where UW River Falls uses Papercut. That is the Papercut logo, and I just customized a variant of the icon. Changing the icon can also be handy if you are using a generic virtual print queue, but using a specific model of printer that corresponds to whatever's most common for you. Making the icon generic can lead to fewer complaints about customers of the printer they're printing to doesn't look like its icon, which, sorry, but I've actually gotten those. Last but not least, if you are using a customized PPD driver, customizing the icon can be a flag to tell a technician looking at the computer, hey, you're using this customized driver without having to teach, say, a student worker how to dig into the etc cups PPD directory. Filters, they're just binary files that translate the print job from its native either PostScript or PDF format into something that the printer can actually understand. They're provided by the manufacturer. They are currently not signed, but though sandboxed and called in the PPD with cups filter. You can't don't want to do anything with them, but when you are diagnosing printer failures, if you're getting errors about filter failed, that's what cups is talking about or is trying to warn you about. Of note, if you are running into that, one diagnostic step is go into the PPD, look up the cups filter keyword to get the path to the filter, then start checking, is the filter there? If I pretend to throw a PostScript job at it or even invoke it on the command line, does it immediately segfold or something? And so on and so forth. Of note, the cups filter command does exhibit PostScript's kind of quirky structure where it is data then command name, where most languages run command name then data. Okay, so on to inside a typical PPD. This is one of the older generic ones, and apologies for the wallow text effect. But PPDs will always start out with a shebang-like interpreter note to just say this is a PPD. Most of them will be the PPD Adobe, though there are some permissible variants like technically *!PS would also be still a valid PPD, even since it declares it as a PostScript file, and PPDs are a subtype of those. Of note, model name key, when you are using the -m switch, that's what cups is checking against, and it is an exact string match. If you need to on changes you might consider to a PPD. Color device and default color space are the switches that say, is this a color printer or is this a black and white one? Change them and you can, it's a fairly common request I've received to only allow black and white printing on a color printer to control consumables costs. This is one way to do it. Of note, there are often printer presets specific to the manufacturer that will change a key for that. So when I'm asked to do this, I'll usually check for a manufacturer's setting that allows it, since that often works a little more gracefully than this does, and try setting that before I go in and start PPD hacking my heart out. And also the last line is the cups filter. In this case, the filter is the raster2hp command. That's what you're going to start looking for somewhere in library printers. Okay. UI constraints, do more or less what it sounds like. They constrain the options in the user interface. You'll notice there is the constraint, then a column explaining the option, then starred items. The last asterisk in each of those lines that will be the default when the PPD is parsed, essentially when the print queue is created, but the user will still be able to change it. Open UI, close UI, just brackets groups of settings. Basically, it corresponds to something like that in the user interface. They have the same amenable, they always have a default, they usually have a default key for a given variable, so you can look at setting defaults that way. If you set the default page size or if you eliminate options other than the one you want the user to pick, those disappear from the UI, so it's a way to invoke permanent changes. Okay, on to discovery, actually managing to get the printers or find them. There's multiple techniques. Network segregation, where you just put all of the printers in one VLAN or subnet on your network. Private list techniques, where the management architecture controls what printers people see. DNS service discovery from Department of Redundancy Department. It allows users to find printers on their own. It's used by AirPrint and IPP everywhere. And then there are directory services. Okay. On the network segregation part, just you put all the printers in their own little VLAN or subnet. You typically will not allow users, so again, it's up to your management taste of access to them. It works well if you already have it set up, because you only have to look in one place for printers, but if not, if your printers are just intermingled on your network with computers or other devices, it's a fair amount of work to create. Access controls course, you can either let people add a printer or not, typically, and not much more than that. It is a beginning of access. It's sort of a beginning of managing printers, but sort of it should not be the method. This is just a Apple script from ages ago, where when we had basically network segregation is the only feasible way of managing the printers, it just runs on the client, scans the relevant printer VLANs for any devices, gives a list to the customer for them to pick. And it worked. It was slow and clunky, but it worked. Next, on private list methods, where basically the management architecture keeps the list and makes the determinations about who gets what. It's Fleetsmith, Monkey, Jamf all offer options for this. Of note, it doesn't necessarily take the form of a list. If you've got a bunch of policies in, say, Jamf for this department gets this printer, this department gets that printer, that is a private list method, even though there is no single list you're keeping. It's really easy to set up, or comparatively easy to set up. You're not going to be asking for help from, say, networking or anybody else in IT to get it configured. Access control is as fine-grained as you want it to be. The catch, and it's a big catch, is as the organization or the number of printers scales larger, it rapidly becomes unworkable managing all of these individual printer policies or groups and whatnot. So scaling rapidly becomes a headache. Segue into philosophy. Managing printers one by one from multiple departments, especially when you may very well have Active Directory or some directory service that's already keeping track of who's in what department, gets unworkable. And we're Mac admins, we're not Christopher Columbus. We really don't need to discover things people already know about. Printers are devices that give data form in real life. They're physical objects that people can walk around their offices and see, or around a lab. They know they're there, and if you let your customers or users find them, they'll often be happier about it than you sort of poking printers at them. Okay. Methods for doing amenable to that are, the easiest one is domain name service discovery. It's often on by default on newer printers. It's extremely simple to use. It is the technology behind AirPrint and IPP everywhere. However, access control is usually non-existent. It again does not scale well because by default, the AirPrint and IPP everywhere do not reach beyond the VLAN they're in, VLAN or subnet they are in. You can implement IP helpers or a few other methods to get around this, but as the number of devices and printers you've got increases, it rapidly becomes unworkable, and it does nothing to answer the question of access control. If for some reason you do want to still discover printers programmatically that are using DNS-SD, the command is lpinfo-v, which tells CUPS to list all known interfaces, which includes all known AirPrint interfaces. Anything in the resulting lines of text it produces, anything starting network DNS-SD is an AirPrint printer. And you can parse that out. Meanwhile, IPP find finds IPP everywhere printers, and again, it's just sort of a default command included with CUPS. It produces the cleanest output of basically any command I'm going to tell you about today. It is just a list of URLs for printers. However, before using these, consider your motives, since if you are using DNS-SD, the one upside is you don't have to do programmatic discovery. You can let your users do it. I've only used these commands to try and find and shut down AirPrint and IPP everywhere, or people who've turned on sharing. Brings us to directory services. Active Directory is the big one. Open Directory also has some printer tracking. The downside is it is major work to implement, and you'll inevitably need help. The upside, it lets users find the printers they want. The access control is excellent. It is probably, if you are operating at any scale, it is the way you want to do it, since it gives you both discovery and controlled access. Downsides on the Mac: if you are using Active Directory, you can discover the printer but not the driver. It ends up defeating the driver discovery because the Mac will make the snmp call, which is how it figures out the manufacturer, to either the Active Directory server or your Windows print server, which will have no idea what to do with it, rather than to the printer itself. And it depends on the computer being bound to the directory service. Unless, if you're using Windows print servers or queues, there is smbclient. It can query prints. It can query Windows print servers for the resource they have, and in fact, any kind of Windows print server or Windows server for the resources it have. You could use it to look up drive shares if you wanted to. It is Kerberos savvy if the computer is bound, or alternately, if you're using something like Nomad Login, which handles generating Kerberos tickets for you, you can even run it without a password and get in. Otherwise, just build an account that can do nothing but authenticate to get the list of printers and use that. The output is tolerably easy to parse. It's built for it does not have an XML option. Unfortunately, it is built for human readability, but it's still usable. Back to, since it discovers anything using the SMB protocol, you will get not printer things in there. Fortunately, the type column is constant, so you can just grep, sed, awk, use whatever your favorite text parsing tool is to narrow it down to the printers. on an on a Active Directory implementation, the comments field corresponds to the comment field in Active Directory. At UWRF, there was already some general precedent that you more or less specified the printer model there. I asked and got that refined to it is always exactly the printer model string. Unfortunately, on different implementations, what, if anything, ends up in the comments field is more erratic. But I found putting the printer, for reasons I'll show in a little bit, putting in the printer model string is highly helpful if you've got your directory service manager as a friend who might want to, or alternately the printer guy, you might want to ask about that. And this is just a variant of a script I previously used where just smbclient view is the relevant verb. You give it the Windows more or less the Windows style UNC path, except using forward slashes rather than backslashes, and it will spit back the information you want. But back to it can, since it again only gives you a list of printers and whatever's in the comments field, you still are stuck with the problem of how do you figure out you've got a printer, what driver is it using? Back to onto Ipinfo. If you can get that model string, Ipinfo has a query mode product. The language is optional and up to you. And then add the M switch on the end. It will respond with every driver model it has that corresponds to that model string. It is more or less what the operating system itself is using when it's trying to match drivers and printers. Of note, this is way, way faster than zgrepping through everything in your library printer's PPD directory, which is about the only other way you'd be able to do this. And some sample output, since multiple matches are possible, you will want to, in any scripts you write, account for that. I usually just pick the first one. But yeah, you give the command, give it the model string, and that's everything CUPS knows about that could possibly work with that printer. In the event you can't get the model string, there is yet another command, snmpwalk, snmp, Simple Network Management Protocol. It will give you more than you ever wanted to know about that printer. And the output will require extensive parsing to turn it into anything useful, but it will give you the model string. So it is from my perspective, it is a last resort method for finding printer information on a computer if you don't have techniques like a bound computer, but it's a method. Of note that it may or may not be compatible with network segregation depending on what level of access, since it does need to talk directly to the printer, not the server, or not the print server. Okay. That's pretty much what I had. Any questions at the moment? Or? Mm-hmm.
So with smbclient, that can work if you have print servers but are not AD bound.
Correct. If you're not AD bound, you do need to get it will need to do authentication somehow, so you'll need to either get a Kerberos ticket with some other utility or have a service account that it can use.
And how is that how is that viewable to the users if using SMB util is what I'm trying to understand.
You make it part. The goal is the appeal of it is that it can be stuck into an automated script
Okay,
to do, it can be a part of a larger script to spit out output.
okay,
If you visit that site, you will be, for the moment, disappointed that I haven't uploaded the slides yet, but I am planning to put the scripts I've shown and the slides there.
If you do have a directory service, is there a way to associate, because I know that because we do have print servers, and yeah, they can select it, but they get no driver choice. Is there a way to do that with the script?
If you are using the add printer program, no. If you are scripting it, yes, that's part of why I'm showing the Ipinfo model commands. If you can get the model string, you can extrapolate from there. My personal favorite method at the moment is get them to put the model string in the AD comment field. So you can get it, then run SMB util will give you the printer and the print queue, network queue, and the model string. Take the model string, feed it to Ipinfo, gives you a model which you can then feed to LPadmin, the LPadmin M switch.
And you would be able to possibly do that through a script, pushing it through Jamf?
Yes, that is what I do.
Okay, so you just they use the script. So is it in self-service, they see the printers, or is it still visible in the ad print?
I build the script into an app just because I figure they might want to revisit it in the future. Install the app, they can run it. You can invoke that through self-service on a case-by-case basis, or just install it, leave it in their applications folder, and they run it when they want to.
Okay, and it's able to just basically, the script helps them get a list of everything it can see. And then you can use the script to
Yeah,
associate.
pop up the list to the user picks a printer.
Okay, and it can just pull that all from your print server.
SMB util view queries the print server of note, or your Active Directory server of note. It does honor whether or not a given printer is published on the Active Directory server. If you are scoping printers by users, you can prompt for their login credentials, feed that to SMB util, and they only see the printers they're supposed to see.
Okay. Yeah, the Jamf method looks nice, the built-in method, but it's pretty arduous, especially since our university has 800 printers.
Yeah, and that's what I did. And back to, we used to have way higher printer counts than before, but what you're describing, where you've got individual print queues available as policies and self-service, is essentially a private list method, and it works. It's comparatively temptingly easy. It's just, it gets impossible to maintain fast.
We're actually looking to purchase some of these, so it's pretty cool to see it in action. Can you touch back on the slide where you changed the printer icons? And can you give me more of a hint of how to do it?
Sorry. To make sure it's... Of course, the generic driver I picked doesn't have it shown. The printer icons are called, in the CUPS PPD file, they are called with app printer icon path. So first step is essentially going to be create a new ICNS file with the icon you want. That's fairly easy to do in just even macOS Preview. Put it someplace you know. I would recommend libraries, printers, your organization name, or whatever the short form is, and then icons. And then edit the PPD file, prepare a parsed PPD file, i.e. add the printer to a test machine. Look at that parsed PPD file, find the APP printer icon path, or if you're using something really bizarre, even just add it towards immediately after the comments. Take that PPD, gzip it, move it back to library printers PPDs, and package that.
So would you say, like, take an existing one, copy it, and then create it and make it your own?
Yeah, essentially.
Like that? All right. The reason I ask, because we're looking into getting rid of, say, listing 8,000 printers or 800 printers, right? And having, say, 2 print queues, one for copiers, one for HP machines, and everything is tapped to release. So it just goes to a generic queue. So I was interested in saying, okay, let's make this our Riverdale logo so they know it's not directly to a specific printer. And they, like you said, wait, the printer I'm printing to doesn't look like this one. Why is it going there?
Yeah. And it's a very similar system we're using to what you're describing. They're mobile virtual network print queues. Papercut calls it follow me printing, which totally doesn't sound creepy, so we didn't use that name. Internally, we call it print anywhere. Yeah, it is handy, again, for both getting people away from the idea of this prints to this printer, and for also telling your technicians, okay, did this thing actually get set up correctly if there's ever a ticket?
We use Papercut as well, and I create the print configurations in using Jamf admin, and then putting it in policies. And sometimes these print configurations don't work, and the only way to get it to work is to go manually put in the SMB path on the, for Windows printing onto the Mac itself. Have you run into any issues pushing those kind of
Yes, though they've generally been settled as I've upgraded the JSS. They've made it a lot less buggy over time. Currently, Capture works pretty well. We still do one-off capture in Jamf admin, and then publish via Jamf printers for labs. And I've just had to redo those over this summer as we've revamped our labs, and it was working fairly smoothly for me.
Yeah, and my administrator just upgraded Papercut too, so I'm waiting to see how that works. But usually with Papercut, the print configuration is pushed, but then the user is always getting a message that it needs to authenticate. It sits there in the queue and it needs to authenticate. They've already authenticated to that printer with Papercut because they have to log in to authenticate, and it kind of gets into a loop.
Check, things to check on that would be way back in the anatomy, the LP admin command. The OAuth info required switch, negotiate means Kerberos. You could also just use username, comma, password. That'll cause it to prompt the user for a password, but hopefully only once. If you think the other time I often run into that on an individual user's computer is a keychain issue.
Often because we have a login hook that puts Papercut. They have to log in at least once when they per user on the computer, and then sometimes you have to authenticate if it's the first time they're using the printer.
Behold the command for changing a printer password in a keychain or doing it programmatically. Were you to shift this to delete, I believe it's delete internet password for the verb, and then used L, the display name of the printer, you could delete existing keychain entries in a user's keychain, assuming you're not there and can't just use keychain access itself. And yeah, try purging those, see if that gets it to get rid of the authentication errors.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question around AD access to printers. You mentioned we can use smbclient to kind of query those printers based on user access.
You would have to capture the user's credentials, i.e. prompt them for it, and then use that when authenticating, when constructing the authentication command.
Is that a flag in smbclient?
Okay. Up here where the third line print list to do shell script is where the actual smbclient command is. Is that tolerably viewable for most of you? The part where it is AD domain is going to be the Active Directory domain separated by a semicolon. Print account, you would put in the user's account, colon, and print PW would be their password, then at your print server.
Gotcha. Okay, and of course, this is all assuming that we have access control set up on printers.
Yeah.
Like right now, we're wide open, but if we lock those down, we could use that.
And I started there too, but for me it was probably 10 years ago at this point when the last time that we had them completely Wild West open was.
How would that script work if you can retrieve Kerberos tickets?
If you can or can't? Can?
Yeah. Like that print
You could
account-
simply omit the username and password and probably even the AD domain and it would just work.
Okay.
Alternately, if you want to test, you run the klist command first and look for something corresponding to your AD domain.
Okay. Yeah, because we right now have Enterprise Connect, and then there's going to be the new Kerberos extension that there's not a ton of documentation on, but it looks like the integration in Catalina of Enterprise Connect.
Yeah, and we looked at Enterprise Connect and ultimately declined it because it didn't solve enough of our binding issues. But yeah, based on my understanding of how it is generating Kerberos tickets, that should be a method of getting a valid ticket, in which case you could just do smbclient view / print server URI and it works. Okay. Anything?
Just general, because I don't necessarily have details in regards to the failures that we're having. We have a few printers in our library, obviously, that are controlled by PaperCut, and they're on our Mac side. Sporadically and throughout the semester, we'll have them just freeze. And when going back and checking the logs, there's nothing that is outstanding or that kind of like points out to like while they're freezing during a job, or they'll just freeze out for the end user. Normally, we're just resetting them, and then for whatever reason, it kind of like hashes it out and fixes it.
In terms of it, do you know, is the freeze is happening on the queue, on the PaperCut queue side once the job is
They're not even
done?
that simple, because we'll go in on to verify the queue, and everything's clear, and there's nothing there.
Quirky idea. On your PaperCut server, PaperCut has their own, as I recall, it's either IPP or LPD implementation. i.e. not the ancient Microsoft Windows LPD service, but Papercut offers one. Try installing that and then redo, if you're using an SMP queue, try calling them with that instead. See if it helps.
Okay, thank you.
I recall just in our labs, yeah, we had some problems very similar to that where jobs would either freeze or evaporate without a trace, and that helped.
There's no root cause. Like, you
Yeah.
go back and you check the log and you're like,
Yeah.
and it kind of corrects itself and it'll just come back. Thank you.
I think you have a question? Oh, okay. Casualty.
You had talked about using IPP find to find people who've turned on sharing or Azure traffic.
IPP find won't find people who are sharing. The Ipinfo-V will.
Okay. What is your approach to, we have a lot of people who end up turning on sharing. What do you do then?
Gee, maybe, depending on scale, consider emailing them and telling them, no, don't do that. The other, since that was ineffective, the other tactics we moved on to, there is a kubectl, I think it's -- enable - sharing off, though you'll want to recheck that to turn off sharing on a given computer. Historically, I hacked the service list SML inside the prefs pane, so printer sharing was no longer an option on Macs, but that's now SIP protected, so instead I just hide the sharing prefs pane entirely with a MDM issued configuration profile, because in general, you don't want them doing any. Sharing lets you, let's see, rename computers to anything you want, turn on your own DNS, turn on a file server, turn on a web server, share printers. Do you want think over, in a reasonably controlled environment, do you want your users doing any of those things? So yeah, our modern solution is simply don't let people get at the sharing pref pane, and usually when I'm running LP admin commands, I will throw in -o printer is shared false.
I've seen printer configs that I've created in Jamf show up as shared printers, even though they're not set up as shared printers. When they're deployed to the computer, you go to the computer and it says, it's the checkbox is there,
Okay.
and it wasn't created that way. So I don't know if it happens in the recent versions, but that's one thing I've had to do. I've seen
Yeah.
is
So yeah, the good news is there is a global kubectl command to just turn off printer sharing.
I'll add to that the Jamf way of doing it uses the default. So if the default on the client computer is that printing is enabled or sharing is enabled, those are
pick up that
created
default.
with enabled. So if you use the kubectl command he's talking about and disable it from the beginning,
And
on anything that's deployed is not shared.
yeah, you can also turn off sharing per printer in the GUI. And last but not least, if for whatever reason you don't like the way Jamf's doing it, hey, it'll run scripts. LP admin is ready and waiting for you.
Hi, can you walk us back through the part where you demoed with the presets? And you did the open in preview, and so you were able to access the preset
Okay.
information in temp?
Yes, let's. And yeah, my apologies if it wasn't clear enough. Okay, start with some document in whatever program you want to do the presets on. Set whatever features you like. Sadly, this is a generic driver test, so there aren't that many. And then the trick of it is to get the job sort of ready for the queue, but not in it or not spooled, because once that happens, the preset is essentially merged into this pile of PostScript and you can't readily get it out. So the trick I prefer is under PDF, open in preview. Well, you got the document in preview. On Macs in general, this little icon that you will see in a document window is sort of a draggable copy of that document. Historically, you could command click on it, starting in around High Sierra or Sierra. They restricted that so you can't do it to hidden, or if the program, like a lot of Apple software, does not want you to, but you can still drag it. So open a terminal window. Anything you can, if you drag a file into terminal, it interprets that as, okay, enter this path in terminal. You want to get the directory. Just delete the file name itself. Jump to the start of the line. I was using Control-A there, and use the terminal command open. Poof, this is the file that preview is displaying. This is the set of printer presets that you just created. This is just a straight XML properties list. It's not even in the annoying binary format you need to convert. So I would say open it up in the text editor of your choice. Open up a existing set of either empty or overwritable presets, and then start matching the keys. You'll discover that this pset file has a very little block at the top regarding what's the print job, when was it submitted, and then almost all the rest of it is dead on identical to a printer preset property list.
Cool, thanks.
Follow-up question to that. Once you capture this, where do you push it out to enforce that preset?
User profile, library preferences, and they all begin with the name com.apple print for printer. And I'll try and jump back to...
While you're looking that up.
Sorry.
Can this also be used to enforce user track settings and authentication to printers?
No. Authentication is, you'll want to enforce that in the LP admin command, where it'll be the O printer. Okay, so first off, do you have that path that you like?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, yeah, it'll be the, for enforcing authentication, it'll be the LP admin command and -O auth info required. And options there include none, negotiate, which means Kerberos, but it will fall back to username and password, or simply username, comma, password, no spaces, means use a username and password.
I guess I don't think we do authentication, we do user tracking. And so like each department has a 4-digit code to put in for it to work.
That gets fun. It is up to the manufacturer. If If it, do you know, are you using, like, say, High Sierra or newer, and people can still enter the codes manually in the interface?
Yeah, what we do today to just get around it in our self-service, we have installed this printer, and then it's a pop-up afterwards, now call the help desk to finish this. And so the help desk will show you how to put the code in.
Okay. It is dependent on the manufacturer. It sounds like you're doing a user code, which we did used to have that before we implemented PaperCut. In that case, it was also part of a nightmare era where we had Konica Minoltas that said they supported Macs but really didn't, so we had to use Gutenprint drivers. For that one, I ended up hacking the PPD to actually enter the user code because that's where it was stored. That being said, and I'm sorry, but it's entirely dependent on the structure of the print driver and the manufacturer, but there are good odds that it is, in fact, a printer preset where you would enter that information, but you'll have to dig through the PPD to figure out what and where.
I'll try to.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have anything more specific, but in my experience, it's always been poke, test, okay, and do it again whenever the next next printer comes along. Or sorry, we have Konica Minoltas now. The Mac support headache machines were Ricoh Laniers. Sorry. The Konica Minoltas have actually been pretty good for us. The issue with Ricoh Lanier was they are supported on Macs if you pay extra to buy a PostScript card for them, but they don't really make that obvious in the documentation, and it's a significant added per machine expense. And we're getting close to time. Anything else? Okay, then. Thank you. There is the QR code for the survey, or anybody want to capture that? Otherwise, I have the one earlier to the GitHub repo that I promised to start filling with stuff.
Test boxes are USB charged, about time.
Hey.